What if one jet could land like a helicopter, fight like a Raptor, and slip through enemy radar like a ghost, without switching aircraft, pilots, or missions? That was the outrageous promise behind the F-35B, a single machine that would replace entire fleets, carry smarter eyes and ears than any fighter before it, and, at the push of a button, drop from forward flight into a controlled hover, and set down on a warship's deck the way a helicopter would. For the US Marines, it wasn't a cool party trick. It was a strategic cheat code, air power from tiny decks and rough fields, anywhere a crisis erupts. If you clicked wondering whether that promise was real, or marketing gloss, let's confirm it right now. The F-35B pairs stealth shaping with a helmet that doesn't just show instruments. It pipes the jet's fused sensor picture straight onto the pilot's visor. So the aircraft and pilot think together like a single system. Pilots call it situational awareness on easy mode. Engineers call it sensor fusion. Rivals call it a problem. But here's the catch no one puts on the billboard. To get vertical landings, stealth, and frontline lethality into one airframe, you have to make brutal trade-offs. Lift fan and swiveling exhaust mean weight and volume that don't exist on the F-22. Stealth-friendly shapes hate the sharp corners that make fighters nimble. And the more your jet is a flying computer, the more your war machine lives or dies by code, maintenance, and supply chains back home. That's not drama. That's the design brief. And yet, on paper, the B model looks like science fiction that made it off the napkin. A stealth fighter that can hunt in packs, quietly sharing targets with wingmen like a hive mind while staying hard to see and harder to shoot. A cockpit where the HUD is your entire field of view. A jet that can punch air to air and air to ground in the same sortie, then pivot to a postage stamp deck and drop in vertically. It's the Swiss Army knife no Air Force should ever be able to afford, but somehow did. So which is it? A trillion-dollar triumph that changed how the West fights, or the most expensive compromise ever bolted together? The truth lives in the trade-offs, in the stealth geometry that hates corner reflections, in the intakes sculpted to feed a hungry engine without lighting up a radar screen, and in that giant lift fan that turns a supersonic arrow into a hovering anvil on purpose. Across the next sections, we're going to pull the skin off the myth and look at the machinery. We'll see how the B model actually lands like a helicopter without becoming one, why its stealth is less invisible and more invisible until too late, and how the very features that make it magical can also make it maddening. By the end, you'll know exactly what the F-35B is and what it isn't. But first, to understand why this jet had to be impossible before it could be inevitable, we need to start at the beginning. The vision that promised one airplane could do the work of many, and the moment everyone realized that promise comes with a bill. The story of the F-35B begins with a question that sounds almost naive. Why not build one fighter jet that can do everything? For decades, the US military fielded specialized aircraft for specialized jobs. The F-16 was a nimble dogfighter. The AV-8B Harrier was a Marine Corps lifeline, able to take off and land vertically on cramped assault ships. The F-117 Nighthawk pioneered stealth, slipping past radars to strike targets in the dead of night. And the B-2 Spirit proved that a flying wing could carry heavy loads while remaining nearly undetectable. Each was brilliant in its own lane, but each was limited. By the late 1990s, Pentagon planners were tired of juggling fleets, training pilots for different platforms, maintaining spare parts across dozens of aircraft types, and spending billions just to keep legacy jets alive. It was a logistical nightmare. The solution sounded elegant on paper. Create a single fighter family, built around a common airframe, but tweaked for each branch's needs. A stealthy jet for the Air Force, a carrier-capable version for the Navy, and for the Marines, a machine that could do the impossible. Take off like a fighter, fight like a fifth-gen Predator, then drop onto a warship deck like a helicopter. The Marines had the loudest voice in that conversation. For them, vertical landing wasn't a luxury. It was survival. Their amphibious assault ships were too small to host classic fighters, but Harriers had proven how game-changing it was to launch jets close to the front lines. The F-35B would be the successor, promising stealth, supersonic speed, and raw power, without needing a giant carrier. On paper, it was genius. One jet to replace many. Shared parts, shared training, shared upgrades. A joint strike fighter that would knit America's services and its allies into a single aerial ecosystem. It wasn't just a military dream. It was a financial one. Billions could be saved if the Pentagon could stop feeding a zoo of aircraft and instead focus on one. But here's the tension that makes this story so gripping. Designing a fighter to serve everyone is like designing one car that's a drag racer, a tank, and a submarine. The requirements don't overlap. They collide. And the F-35B, with its vertical lift fan and stealth skin, would soon become the poster child of compromise. Because while the vision was clear, one fighter for all, turning that dream into reality meant engineers would be forced to break rules of physics, bend the limits of stealth design, and gamble that software could hold together a machine too complex for any single blueprint. And that gamble, it was just getting started. Next, we'll peel back the curtain on the miracle technology that made the F-35B famous. The engine trick that lets a 60 million pound thrust fighter hang in mid-air like a hummingbird. And why that miracle was both its selling point and its Achilles heel. Imagine a jet roaring in at supersonic speed, then, within seconds, slowing to a hover and touching down gently on the deck of a ship barely longer than a football field. That image isn't science fiction. It's the everyday party trick that made the F-35B the crown jewel of the Marines. At the heart of this miracle is a feat of engineering that still feels unreal: the shaft-driven lift fan. Hidden inside the jet's fuselage is a giant vertical turbofan, powered not by its own engine, but by a drive shaft connected to the F-35's main power plant. At the pilot's command, a clutch engages, and suddenly the jet diverts raw horsepower into spinning that massive fan. Combined with a rotating rear exhaust nozzle, the aircraft transitions from forward flight into a controlled hover. To an outside observer, it looks like magic. A stealth fighter hovering motionless, balanced on columns of air. But inside the cockpit, the workload is staggering. Without computers, no human pilot could manage the delicate ballet of thrust, balance, and heat. The F-35's flight control software does the heavy lifting, adjusting flaps, nozzles, and fan speed hundreds of times per second, keeping the jet steady in mid-air. For the Marines, this ability is priceless. With vertical landing, the F-35B doesn't need massive runways or giant carriers. It can launch from small amphibious ships, austere airstrips, even stretches of highway. That flexibility means the Marines can bring fifth-generation air power into combat zones where no other stealth jet could operate. It turns every ship into a miniature aircraft carrier and every coastline into a potential runway. But here's where the story twists. This miracle came with a punishing cost. That lift fan eats up internal space, reducing the B model's fuel load and limiting its weapons bay compared to its Air Force and Navy siblings. It adds weight, which cuts into agility, and the heat from vertical landings scorches decks, forcing the Navy to redesign ship coatings to survive the F-35B's fiery breath. In other words, the feature that made the B model legendary is also the feature that makes it the most compromised. A jet that can do something no rival dares, but one that pays for that trick every single time it takes off. And yet, the spectacle of vertical landing is just one part of the F-35B's allure. Because once airborne, it transforms again, this time into something far scarier: a stealthy, networked hunter with eyes that see everything. Next, we'll explore how the F-35B's stealth design and sensor fusion gave it a reputation not just as a fighter, but as a flying command center, and why that power terrifies America's rivals as much as it frustrates its own pilots. Once the F-35B lifts off, it stops being a hovering spectacle and becomes something even more unsettling. A hunter cloaked in shadows, wired like a supercomputer. At its core, the B model inherits the hard lessons of stealth pioneers like the F-117 Nighthawk and B-2 Spirit. Its body is sculpted with smooth, radar-deflecting curves designed to scatter enemy signals into the void instead of reflecting them back. No giant vertical tails acting as radar mirrors. No sharp corners inviting reflections. Every edge, every panel is angled to make the jet look less like a plane and more like background noise on enemy screens. But stealth here is not about invisibility, it's about delay. No aircraft is truly invisible to radar. The F-35B's trick is to shrink the detection window, buying crucial seconds where it can see and strike first, while the enemy is still guessing if the blip is real. Those seconds are often the difference between living and dying in modern air combat. Yet stealth is only half the story. The true revolution of the F-35B lies in its sensor fusion. Imagine every radar return, every infrared signature, every piece of battlefield data being crunched, combined, and then painted directly onto a pilot's helmet visor. Instead of staring at dials and screens, the pilot looks outside, and the jet's helmet-mounted display projects a 360-degree picture of the world, stitched together from multiple sensors. Targets glow, friendlies are tagged, ground threats pulse in red. Pilots call it God's eye view. And when multiple F-35s fly together, their data links merge those visions into a single, shared reality. 4 jets don't just fly in formation. They think as one. Each pilot sees what the others see, turning a flight into a hive mind of hunters. In practice, this means one jet can detect an enemy, another can fire the missile, and a third can confirm the kill, all without saying a word over radio. But here's the paradox. The more powerful the tech, the more fragile the machine. That same software that gives pilots superhuman vision has at times been riddled with bugs. Early versions crashed systems mid-flight. Updates were delayed, leaving squadrons waiting on code instead of hardware. Some Marines grumbled that their $100 million fighter felt less like a weapon and more like a beta test. Still, the capability is undeniable. Rivals look at the F-35B and see not just an aircraft, but a flying command center, an information broker that can control battles beyond the range of its missiles. It isn't just about dogfights. It's about deciding who sees first, who fires first, and who lives long enough to tell the story. And yet, every advantage came with a price, because in making a jet that could see everything, designers had to sacrifice other things: raw speed, agility, payload. The very features that made the F-22 Raptor untouchable in a duel were traded away in the name of multi-role versatility. Next, we'll pull the curtain back on those brutal trade-offs. How stealth collided with maneuverability, how the lift fan ate away at firepower, and why engineers learned that in the F-35B, every miracle came with a bill. Every miracle in the F-35B comes with a hidden invoice. On the glossy brochures, it's billed as the jet that can do everything: stealth, vertical landing, supersonic dash, deep strike. But engineers know the truth. To make one aircraft serve 3 branches of the military, they had to bend physics until it nearly broke. And those compromises still haunt the jet today. First, the lift fan. That giant vertical engine inside the fuselage may be the party trick that allows vertical landings, but it eats into the jet's most precious resources: space and weight. Where the Air Force's F-35A carries more fuel and larger weapons bays, the B model is cramped. Less fuel means less range. Smaller bays mean fewer stealthy weapons can be tucked inside. And when you're in a fight, where every extra mile and every extra missile matters, those limits sting. Then there's maneuverability. True 5th-generation fighters, like the F-22 Raptor, were built to dominate the skies in dogfights, with thrust vectoring engines and blistering agility. The F-35B was never meant to dance like that. Its stealthy shaping, bulky lift system, and heavier frame mean it will never turn and burn with the best. It's not built for a knife fight. It's built to avoid one altogether. Critics argue that if stealth is ever compromised, the B model could find itself dangerously exposed. Software is another battlefield. The F-35 is as much a flying computer as it is an airplane. Thousands of lines of code manage everything from flight stability to targeting. But complex code breeds complex problems. Early Marine squadrons dealt with bugs so severe that jets were grounded while programmers raced to patch the system. One Marine pilot famously said, "You don't fly the F-35, you reboot it." The irony of a $1 trillion jet depending on software stability isn't lost on anyone. And then there's the cost. At nearly $100 million per aircraft, and with lifetime costs projected in the trillions, the F-35B became the most expensive weapons program in history. Critics slammed it as a boondoggle, a Frankenstein fighter that tried to do everything but risked excelling at nothing. Yet supporters countered that such costs were inevitable when building the most advanced fighter the world had ever seen. Even America's allies felt the pain. Countries like the UK, Italy, and Japan signed on for the B model, betting their futures on its versatility. But delays, spiraling expenses, and maintenance nightmares strained those relationships. Some allies questioned whether they had bought into a dream or a burden. Still, through all the compromises, the F-35B managed something extraordinary. It proved that a stealthy supersonic jet could take off vertically and fight. No other nation has fielded anything like it. Russia and China toyed with similar concepts, but never brought them to operational service. In that sense, the B model isn't just unique, it's unmatched. And yet, the controversy didn't end with engineering. It grew even louder when the program left the drawing board and entered the global stage, where billions of dollars and the future of Western air power were at stake. Next, we'll dive into global power and controversy. How the F-35B became both a cornerstone of US alliances and a lightning rod for critics who saw it as a trillion-dollar gamble. By the time the F-35B left prototype status, it was more than just an airplane. It was a global political project. Over a dozen nations had already invested in it, some as full partners, others as buyers, tying their air power futures directly to a jet that wasn't even combat ready yet. The logic was simple. If the United States and its closest allies all flew the same fighter, they would gain an unmatched advantage in interoperability. A British pilot could climb into an Italian F-35B, launch from a Japanese carrier, and share battlefield data seamlessly with a US Marine squadron. For the first time, a Western alliance could fight with a single digital language of air power. It was a bold vision of military unity, but alongside that vision came the political firestorm. The F-35 program ballooned into the most expensive weapons project in history, with lifetime costs projected at over $1 trillion. Every delay, every malfunction, every redesign became front-page news. Lawmakers grilled Pentagon officials in hearings. Journalists dubbed it the jet that ate the defense budget, and critics blasted it as a Frankenstein fighter that tried to please everyone, but risked mastering nothing. Even allies began to sweat. The UK bet heavily on the F-35B for its new Queen Elizabeth-class carriers. Italy invested in domestic assembly lines. Japan announced it would convert helicopter destroyers into mini-carriers specifically for the F-35B. But with costs climbing and reports of software flaws and maintenance bottlenecks, doubts spread. Would the global jet actually deliver global power? Or just global headaches? And then there was the security risk. The more countries that bought the F-35, the more chances there were for its secrets to leak. Rivals like China and Russia raced to study its design, eager to copy or counter its stealth. Beijing's J-20 and Moscow's Su-57 were widely viewed as partial responses to the F-35's dominance, sparking a new generation of stealth competition. Yet despite all the criticism, the program marched on. Why? Because for all its flaws, the F-35B gave allies something they'd never had before, a shared deterrent. To attack one F-35 nation was to risk fighting them all. And when a squadron of B models lifts from a marine amphibious ship in the Pacific, or a British carrier in the Atlantic, the message is clear. Western air power can deploy anywhere, anytime, without a full-sized carrier fleet. In that sense, the controversy is baked into the DNA of the jet. It's simultaneously a symbol of unity and of overspending, a marvel of engineering, and a cautionary tale of ambition, loved by some, loathed by others, but too important to fail. And eventually, theory gave way to practice. The jet that critics said would never be ready finally flew combat missions, proving it wasn't just a science project. But did it live up to the hype, or expose its limitations in the real world? Next, we'll step onto the battlefield and see how the F-35B performs when the stakes are real. Does it dominate as promised, or struggle under the weight of its compromises? Theories, promises, and prototypes mean little until a jet meets the chaos of war. For the F-35B, that moment came quietly. No dramatic unveiling, no Hollywood-style showdown. Instead, the Marines slipped the B model into real missions, from the Middle East to the Pacific, testing whether this trillion-dollar machine could actually deliver. On paper, the jet's strengths are undeniable. Its stealth allows it to slip into defended airspace, gather intelligence, and pass targeting data to allies without ever being seen. Its sense of fusion makes it less a fighter and more a flying command post, feeding information to ships, ground troops, and other aircraft. In exercises, entire battles have swung simply because F-35B's spotted threats long before anyone else did. A squadron of them doesn't just fight, it changes the way everyone around them fights. But the battlefield has also revealed the cracks. Maintenance remains a nightmare. For every hour of flight, Early models demanded dozens of hours of groundwork. Parts shortages forced jets to sit idle. The vaunted computer system designed to predict failures often produced errors instead. In practice, this meant that some Marine squadrons couldn't field enough jets to meet mission demands, even when aircraft were technically delivered. And then, there's the issue of dogfighting. Critics have long warned that the F-35B can't match fourth-generation fighters in a close-range duel. Its heavier body, shaped for stealth, can't turn with the razor-sharp agility of an F-16 or F-18. In controlled tests, pilots admitted the B model was not built for the knife fight. It was built to kill from afar, before an enemy ever sees it. That works as long as stealth holds. But if stealth fails, the risk is real. Still, in real operations, the jet has proven something its enemies fear most: survivability. Even when maintenance slows squadrons, even when bugs frustrate crews, the F-35B has yet to face a peer rival in open combat. And that uncertainty, what happens the first time it squares off against Chinese J-20s or Russian air defenses, may be its greatest weapon. Rivals don't know if it's flawed or unbeatable. That ambiguity itself is deterrence. The verdict, then, is complicated. On the battlefield, the F-35B is both a marvel and a warning. It delivers breathtaking intelligence and reach, but it demands enormous upkeep. It terrifies adversaries with its stealth, yet it struggles in roles older jets mastered decades ago. It is a fighter that can win wars, but only if the wars are fought on its terms. And so we return to the trillion-dollar question: was it worth it? Did the gamble pay off? Or will history remember the F-35B as a costly compromise that promised too much? In the final chapter, we'll weigh the paradox of the F-35B and leave you with the question every general, engineer, and taxpayer must ask: is this jet the future of warfare, or the most expensive lesson in aviation history? The F-35B was born out of ambition so bold it bordered on arrogance. Build a single jet that could outfight enemies in the sky, evade detection like a ghost, and land vertically on a ship's deck as if it were a helicopter. Against all odds, engineers made it real. The B model can hover, it can cloak itself from radar, and it can stitch together the battlefield into a digital map more powerful than any pilot has ever seen. But those miracles didn't come free. Every feature demanded a sacrifice. The lift fan that makes vertical landings possible robbed the jet of fuel and payload. The stealth shaping that delays radar detection stole away agility. The all-seeing software that fuses data turned the plane into a flying supercomputer, one that sometimes crashed like a laptop. And the price tag? Higher than any aircraft in history. That's the paradox of the F-35B. It is simultaneously the most advanced jet ever fielded and the most controversial. A weapon of breathtaking promise, and a cautionary tale about what happens when ambition outpaces reality. To its champions, it's the aircraft that secures the West's dominance for decades to come. To its critics, it's a trillion-dollar compromise in camouflage paint. And now, with the world watching rising tensions in the Pacific, the Middle East and beyond, the question isn't academic. One day soon, the F-35B will face an enemy that doesn't blink first. When that moment comes, we'll finally learn whether this jet was worth every dollar, or whether history will mark it as the most expensive gamble in aviation. So I'll leave you with this thought. Is the